Greetings, I am your host, Ghoulash, and when I'm not being viciously beaten by my creator, Dr. Wolfula, I'm here at the Wolfulair, being forced to review movies. The film I'm being forced to review for this video is Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning. Dr. Wolfula was supposed to review this movie, but when he found out that Jason wasn't the killer, he decided to make me review the movie instead. He said it isn't a real Friday the 13th movie if Jason doesn't murder people. Then I told him that Jason wasn't the killer in the first movie. It was his mother. But then Dr. Wolfula just yelled at me. And hit me. 37 times. Then he spit on me. Friday the 13th Part 5 tells the continued story of Tommy Jarvis, who killed Jason Voorhees when he was a little boy. Tommy has become a bit of a nut after killing that guy 6 years ago, so he winds up at Pinehurst, a halfway house for troubled teenagers, or adult actors playing teenagers. It's here where a young man obsessed with candy bars named Joey is hacked to death with an axe for being annoying.
I'll just put it over here, and later on when you're hungry you can have it. Well, if that's the way you feel, forget it, Vic. Just forget it. But I think you're really out of line.
Vic, the initial killer, is arrested, but Joey's death seems to kick off a killing spree by a mysterious murderer that appears to be the late Jason Voorhees. Keep in mind that Jason is dead in Part 5. Part 5 makes this clear by burning the bridge of Jason ever coming back by having one of the characters plainly state that Jason was cremated after he got killed by Tommy.
Jason Voorhees is dead! His body was cremated. He's nothing but a handful of ash.
So Jason ain't never gonna come back. Jason only lives on as a ghost that exists within Tommy's psyche. Just like how Corey Feldman lives on as a cameo ghost within Tommy's psyche. So who's the killer, you ask? Well, Part 5 establishes Tommy Jarvis as its red herring. The writers really want you to think that Tommy is taking over for Jason, given the boy's obsession with Jason and his violent outbursts. Seriously, every time somebody messes with Tommy, he'll flip the guy over and start pounding at his throat. It's insane. I gotta hand it to Tommy's actor, John Shepherd. He does the whole brooding, creepy, insane teenager with issues thing pretty well.
Sure.
All the shenanigans pulled by Tommy are really just there to distract from the real killer, Roy Burns. Wait, who? Okay, Roy Burns is a local paramedic that is the long-lost father of Joey, the kid who liked candy bars a lot and got killed for it. Roy used Jason as a cover for his murders so nobody would get wise to him. Outside of the Jason persona, Roy is pretty much just a background character with a few lines.
I thought you was talking to me.
No, Roy, it's okay.
There's a bunch of shots focused on Roy, though, that are there just to let people know that he exists. The problem with Roy being the killer is that it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Apparently, Roy wanted revenge for the death of his son, just like how Pamela Voorhees wanted revenge for the death of her son. The thing is, though, Pamela had a decent reason for her murders, but Roy doesn't. If Roy wanted revenge, why didn't he kill Vic, the guy who actually killed his son? Vic gets off scot-free and is never seen again after being arrested. Instead, Roy not only kills off the other housemates in Pinehurst, but he also kills random people who have nothing to do with anything. Why is Roy's first victim a guy who was just having car trouble? Are Roy's murders just some kind of temper tantrum? If Roy is a normal, middle-aged man, how come he's able to shrug off all the pain he endures? It's just nonsensical. Other than the stupid-ass twist that Roy is the killer, Part 5, as far as Friday the 13th flicks go, is pretty decent. It's got the Friday the 13th basics in droves. You've got a mass killer who murders shallow teens in over-the-top ways. Even though the kills were heavily censored by the MPAA, the murders by Roy are pretty neat. If you want to see what might happen if you cut a person across the eyes with a pair of shears, Friday the 13th Part 5 has you covered. You fucking weirdo. If you also like to see nudity from the 1980s, Part 5 also has you covered in this regard. Which makes sense when you find out that this movie was directed by a guy who started his career with pornography. Consequently, Part 5 is probably the sleaziest Friday the 13th movie. No scene exemplifies this better than a scene where a balding, mustachioed man asks an attractive waitress out on a date. She proceeds to strip in the restroom, and he proceeds to do cocaine. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this guy actually did real cocaine. I don't think the 1980s Hollywood producers of slasher films would care one way or another. Part 5 has a diverse cast of unknowns playing a variety of different characters to pad out the body count. None of them really stand out as characters, but some of them stand out just for their characteristics alone. Like that one punk goth girl who does that robotics dance by herself, and that guy who looks like a teenage Jerry Seinfeld and always stutters.
I wanna make love with you.
Part 5 does have Miguel A. Nunez Jr. from Return of the Living Dead and Scooby-Doo as a guy who gets impaled in an outhouse after having diarrhea. So it's got that going for it, I guess. Part 5 also is the only Friday the 13th movie where a black character actually survives. I know this really shouldn't be something I should have to mention, but it's a pretty big deal for a slasher movie in the 80s. If you weren't white back in the days before Halloween H2O, you were guaranteed to die. Sure, technically the African-American survivor of Part 5 is that kid Reggie the Reckless, and children almost always survive by default, but still, it's something at least. The ultimate purpose of Friday the 13th Part 5 was to act as a stepping stone toward Tommy Jarvis finally replacing Jason as the killer of the franchise. The end of Part 5 implies that Tommy has become so shook up by all the violence that has occurred in his life that he eventually dons the hockey mask of Roy that he was allowed to keep for some reason. Tommy as the killer would have been interesting for a bit if handled well, but it never happened in the end. Jason was too popular. After Part 5 came out, everybody rioted in the streets of Hollywood demanding for Jason to come back as the killer. In all of the rampant chaos, Paramount released Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, that brought Jason back to life and made Tommy a hero again. I guess the end of Part 5 was just a dream. It's not uncommon for a Friday the 13th movie to end with a dream, after all. All of the continuity errors in the Friday the 13th series can probably be explained as being dreams. Sure, why not? The go-to criticism from people who call Part 5 the worst movie in the series is that it didn't have Jason as the killer. True, that was pretty dumb, but not having Jason as the killer to me definitely doesn't make it the worst Friday the 13th movie. Maybe the third or fourth worst, but not the worst. Part 5 is purely a Friday the 13th movie and offers everything you would want from one. Nothing more, nothing less. If you're a fan of Friday the 13th movies, I don't see any reason why you should avoid Part 5. What do you think, Master?
I think Part 5 sucks, and you're overdue for another beatdown.
Oh no, not the face!
Oh.
So, what did you think about Part 5, Jason? Wow, that's very interesting.